Hello, I'm Larry Johnson, and welcome to this episode of Countercurrents. I'm delighted to be talking to my friend, Alex Krainer, today. We'll be talking about tariffs, the world economy, and war. Nothing alarming there. But thanks for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe button if you found this worth your time. Okay, we're now live. So you're in Europe?
Yes, I am. I'm in Croatia at the moment.
You've signed up with the tariff regime to punish the United States, right?
Yes, of course. Of course.
Okay, so
we are all very. You would not believe our unity. Our unity is very, very strong.
Give me your overall, your 10,000-foot view of what's going on with the tariffs and what the consequences are. I know that's a whole mouthful, but you're capable.
I'll do my best, even though I honestly struggle to make sense out of it at times. It seems to me that from the side of the U.S. administration, the policy that seems to emerge with some consistency is the policy of attack from the United States against Europe. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, that seems to transcend Trump administration, because it's already been in place since the Biden administration, which then you have to wonder, where is it coming from and who's ordering it? And if I were investigating this, the Wall Street banks would be at the top of the list of my list of suspects. But the thing that I was struggling with is Trump's Operation Rough Rider, the renewed attack on Yemen, because it doesn't seem to me to make any kind of sense, and it goes back to Europe. So the interpretation that seems to make sense to me. So they launched this operation. I don't know whatever happened with the Operation Prosperity Guardian, but apparently now we have Operation Rough Rider. Same old attack in Yemen from the air with bombs. The same operation that made no difference since December 2023.
Yeah, and, December 23.
December 23, right? Made no difference, but they're launching it now like nobody's ever seen before. And I was wondering, why on earth would they be doing this? Because, Yemen has endured more than 10 years of this now. Bombing by, the Saudis, the Americans, the Brits, the Israelis, whoever. They endure that. They endured an economic crisis, famine, cholera epidemic. They haven't capitulated to the empire. So what is the point of launching this Operation Rough Rider at this point, which is really exhausting and depleting U.S. forces in the region? It's creating a lot of new downside risk, even though the upside, the stated goal, there's a minimal chance that it could do anything. Yeah. And then what are we today? Tuesday.
No, we're Wednesday.
On Saturday, on the 5th, I was watching a discussion on Nima's Dialogue Works with Larry Wilkerson when he was talking about the tabletop exercise that they held about the traffic through Red Sea, right? Sure. And this was apparently a pretty big and important tabletop exercise because it was sponsored by the Pentagon and the CENTCOM and the AFRICOM and a whole bunch of other national security agencies and a bunch of European national security agencies. And according to Wilkerson, it was as well represented by European participants as the American participants. And they came to the conclusion that this was one of the quote was the new global hub of competitiveness, because between 55 and 60% of all global trade in any given year passes through the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, well, that's extremely interesting, isn't it? Because what happened since they launched the Operation Rough Rider, on the 15th of March this year, is that the whole complete traffic through the Red Sea of commercial trade came to a grinding halt. Even though before the operation, the Houthis were only threatening to stop Israeli vessels.
Right.
European trade was still going through. Well, now it didn't. It's blocked, right? So, whether deliberately or not deliberately, the actions of the Trump administration blocked European trade
Uh-huh.
to the Red Sea.
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a great
and that's JD Vance was complaining, hey, like we're bailing out Europe as we speak, but it's actually the opposite, because before the operation, the trade was passing through. Since they launched the operation, the trade stopped. That is, it didn't really stop. The vessels can still travel, but they have to go around the Cape of Good Hope.
Right.
On a large tanker that adds $500,000 to the cost. And so what Chas Freeman said in that discussion with Larry Wilkerson is that the Houthis leveraged the Lloyds of London against the Europeans. But is it beyond the Trump administration to do the same? Because if they held this tabletop exercise, that means that somebody in the structures of power thought this through. They knew what the risks were involved.
You think so? Okay. That's a reasonable assumption, but watching these guys, I'm convinced they haven't thought any of this through. Okay. I think you're giving the charitable assumption that these are some master 3D chess players.
Yeah.
And I think they're barely qualified now to do pickup sticks. Where you drop the sticks, you have to try to pick one up without moving the others.
I know exactly. It looks that way, doesn't it? And I just spoke with Glenn Deason, and I said to him, I'm torn between thinking these guys are really smart and sophisticated and they thought things through, or these people are completely dumb and they're making it up as they go along. And it's not a trivial question, because if you assume that they are sophisticated and that they analyze things, did their homework, and thought things through, then you can try to kind of deduce what are they doing, why are they doing, and what's the strategy, Whereas if they really are making it up with what they go along, then there's no guessing what might come out of it, because what they do tomorrow might be completely different than what they're doing today. So I am torn between those two, but if I assume that they have thought things through, and if somebody in the U.S. defense establishment held these tabletop exercises and presumably wrote up reports about it, then people understand what the levers of influence are, what they could do to do something or hurt somebody. And in that case, I have to say it's plausible to think that Operation Rough Rider serves the same purpose as blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, as introducing the tariffs against European trade.
Yeah.
And then, as it turns out, the whole European business plan for decades has been to sell highly manufactured goods to the United States and the UK. UK and US were absorbing most of European exports, to use abundant, cheap Russian oil and gas supplies as basically the foundation of their competitiveness, and also to directly supply some of the demand from China, because a lot of European manufacturers transfer their productive capacities to China. So Trump's tariffs pretty much blew up that business plan completely, that whole business model. So it seems to me that consistently the policy of the United States administrations, not just Trump administration, but also the Biden administration, has been to take Europe's lunch away from it. And so we have Operation Rough Rider, renewed bombing of Yemen, the tariffs, the sanctions that Europe has been compelled as a compliant vassal of the United States to impose on its major trading partner, which is Russia, and the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines. So everything kind of converges on the same effect, whether they're doing it wittingly or unwittingly. But it's kneecapping Europe effectively as an economic rival.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems to me that whether this is a deliberate policy or whether it happens to turn out this way, this is what's going on. And I think it's pushing Europe towards a political and economic and social suicide, because it's, you have European powers which are still effectively ruled by the same degenerate colonial elites that have been in power for the last, more than a century and a half, who now see social pressures building up to a point of civil wars and revolutions. Mm-hmm. And so they are completely unprepared, evidently, to deal with the United States not as an ally, but as a rival. And they're so completely blinded by the Project Ukraine, on which they have been singularly obsessed with for the past 10 years now, that they have not only do they not have a response, they have no contingency plans. It seems to me that they're not really even aware of what's going on. They just see that they're losing in Ukraine and that their power is at risk of slipping away, as we've seen with all these new elections, Germany, France, Romania, and so forth, that their only answer is to prepare to bring the war to the populations of Europe, that they're preparing a new regime of repression, that they're ramping up censorship, repression, cancellation of democracy, CBDCs, digital IDs, medical assistance in dying, and all of these similar measures that are designed not to improve Europe's performance and competitiveness in the world, but to simply turn Europe into a dystopian, Orwellian kind of totalitarianism. So that's what I think they are trying to bring about. Whether they will succeed, that's a different question, but this is what we're having.
Well, let's flip that on its head. Europe is not guided by any kind of plan. They appear to be completely in reactive mode. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that is a fair assessment. That's well, they are, to be fair, they are aware of the headwinds, but they react in a very, very much in the manner of the Soviet-style politburos. They commission a big study by, the European Commission demands a study of competitiveness. And who do they ask? They ask Mario Draghi, who has been a banker all his life. He has no idea. He wouldn't know competitiveness if it bit him on the nose. But, he produces a big, long, unreadable report on competitiveness, which gets a few things right and a few things wrong. And then they talk about Mario Draghi's report. And of course, this is not going to solve anything any more than Soviet politburos, directives on Soviet competitiveness could have changed anything. But at the same time, they do realize that they can't let the people of Europe decide anything, because otherwise Europe is going to disintegrate. So they have to be using lawfare to cancel democracy and to make sure that only the pre-approved candidates can even run elections. And people are not stupid. They can tell when they're being shafted over. And I remember now, more than a year ago, about a year and a half ago, I spoke with a friend in France who is close to the military circles. French families that have, multi-generational military traditions and so forth. And they were saying already then that the way this crisis gets resolved is in a civil war. It's going to get bloody. And they said they were preparing for it.
Hmm.
And now we see that we're really going in that direction. And then I have another friend who is in the AfD party who told me the same, that the people in Germany see the same clouds gathering over there. And then it was just a few weeks ago that there was an interview in Britain with one of their very influential, I forget the man's name, he's like a sociologist or something, an academic, who said that the situation in Britain is very, very ripe for a civil war there as well. So it seems that the European project is disintegrating now, that the people in charge, they are selected bureaucrats with, they are basically following orders from above, meaning they're not elected by anybody. They're not people who represent their constituencies in Europe legitimately. They are, they're following the marching orders of George Soros and whoever hands those marching orders to him, which I'm pretty sure are the banking cartel parasites from the city of London. And they're implementing those, but they don't know how to deal with adversity because so far, they were unchallenged. Now they're dealing with real, actual challenges, and the only way they know how to deal with them is through repression. I don't know if it's going to work that way. Historically, for the last 3 millennia, when the ruling oligarchies got into trouble because the social pressures reached boiling points, they would scream, "Barbarians at the gate!"
Right.
And then they would get all the fighting age males who are the main source of risk to them. They would send them off to fight a foreign enemy. There would be big bloodletting, and most of those people would end up sacrificed. And so that way, the social pressures on the ruling oligarchies would be diminished. But now I'm not sure that that's going to work, because for the first time ever in the history of humanity, we have this thing called the internet and the social media. And so the ruling oligarchies are having very difficult time controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
And this whole thing, evil dictator Vladimir Putin is coming for you if we don't go to war and fight him. It doesn't seem to get a lot of people excited. And in fact, the more they try, the more they seem to lose credibility. So I think Europe is going to be really, really interesting, and I think not in a very good way for the next couple of years.
I want to jump back to something you said about maybe help correct, or I can provide some personal experience that you may find helpful with respect to these military tabletop exercises. Your description of it, that, hey, you go through this exercise, this tabletop, and you learn these lessons. When I started scripting these exercises, boy, it's 1994. I thought exactly the same way. I thought, man, this is great. We're going to do this, and we're going to build on knowledge, and we're going to have lessons learned. And I discovered after 23 years of doing it, people didn't learn a damn thing. The lessons were there. You're absolutely right. You sit there and do the exercise and go, yeah, man, this may be a bad idea, or we got some vulnerabilities here. And let's take that on board and let's make some adjustments. No, I never saw that happen by the U.S. military. And we've got an example of it right now I didn't realize they had changed the name Prosperity Guard into Rough Rider, so I thank you for that update. But the ships, the Carrier Strike Group, is accompanied by 2 destroyers and a cruiser usually. And those destroyers use a vertical launch system of missiles. So these are tubes on the deck. There are like 96 of them.
Right.
And, those missiles, on average, cost about $2 million a piece. Okay? So,
right,
right there, you're driving around with $400 million worth of missiles usually. Assuming you got 2 per tube. And when like the Houthis will fire a missile at the ship, they have to fire 2 out.
Yes.
Well, it's not like walking around with a shotgun. You fire it off and you open it up, pull out the empties, and plug in some new ones. No, once they fire, they don't. The only way they can reload that tube is the ship has to sail into a port, and
Yes.
cranes have to be present to put them in. Then the fact that the production of these missiles is limited. It's not like the U.S. factories are turning out 1,000. On average, the inventory for each, whether we're talking, let's see, ATACMS, they no longer build. Okay, the ATACMS missiles up in Ukraine, they no longer build those. The HIMARS, they're down, they turn out like 50 a year. Patriot missiles, 550. So all of a sudden, here they are using up this armament, and they're not thinking, we've got limited inventory. We better accomplish our objective pretty quickly.
Right.
We're going to run out. And on top of it, we actually want to fight China, so we need to have all this weaponry over there, and we're using it all up in the Middle East. That story is out today. So my point in all of this is these people don't think this stuff through. It's all emotion, not reason.
But that is amazing because, yes, I read a story in the New York Times. I think it was published this Saturday exactly about this, that the military's supplies are getting depleted. And then there was a story by 60 Minutes at some point last year, which was covering the Prosperity Guardian, which they were saying, these Houthi missiles and drones, it's not a joke. This is, they're on alert 24/7 because this stuff is coming at them, and they're not shooting off random stuff. This stuff is really dangerous. They need to be on alert to shoot these down, and sooner or later they're going to get lucky. And then, if Trump ran his mouth in his tweet over the weekend, he said these Houthis are never going to sink our ships again. You mean they did sink a ship that we didn't know of? Thank you very much. Now we do know that. So you're putting your troops at risk. They are allegedly really tense and exhausted. You're depleting arsenals of weaponry that you don't really have and you can't really afford to do something that they've been trying to do for the last 10 years and it didn't work. Again, either they're really dumb or there's a different plan in mind. The target of these attacks is not Yemen. It's got to be Europe. I don't know how to explain it again, and maybe you're right. Maybe I'm excessively charitable and give them too much credit. But if the target of their attack is actually Yemen, then they really are a bunch of morons. And
well,
I have a hard time with that.
I think it's Iran, but let me add one more layer of this. To make the explosives that go into these missile systems, they are dependent upon rare earth minerals like antimony, gallium, germanium. Who's the major suppliers of antimony, gallium, germanium? That would
Can I guess? Can I try a guess?
Yeah, go for it, man.
China.
Winner, chicken dinner, man. Yeah. And so, at the very time that we need those elements, what are we doing to China?
Yeah.
And China's punching back and has restricted the export of those. So now the United States is using up all these weapon systems. We need to build more, but we've cut ourselves basically off from the folks that supply what we need in order to make them. Does that reflect somebody who's thought this through? I said no. They're not. I'm a firearms instructor, and one of the things that I teach with the defensive pistol is if you get into a situation where your life's threatened or you get so focused and you're shooting at a particular object, you get tunnel vision. And you see what's in front of you, and you lose situational awareness of what's around the periphery. And I think that's what's going on with the Trump administration right now. They're so, I think they're so fixated on trying to bring China under control, that they've completely lost focus on everything else. They haven't really thought through. Do we want to punish? Do we want to destroy Europe? They're doing a pretty damn good job,
Right.
and let's not alleviate the Europeans of their own suicidal efforts.
Oh, Europeans, I mean, Europeans are doing everything to set themselves back and to dig their hole deeper. Practically everything they do is making things worse.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to me that they're even aware of, apart from Russia bad, it doesn't seem that there's another line of logic in their whole foreign policy. It's all Russia, Russia, Russia. And then, there's Kaja Kallas who says like, well, if we can't defeat Russia, how are we going to defeat China?
Yeah.
I think like
I know.
this is like the inmates took over the asylum. Seriously.
Yeah. And this is there's no. I guess I look at it from the standpoint, there's no action that Russia has taken that would justify the level of alarm and reaction by Europe.
No, absolutely not. Yes.
So it's just like they've invented a narrative about, I call it the Hollywood narrative of Russia as the imperial power, without anybody stepping back and just asking the very simple question, how many countries has the Russians attacked in the last 30 years? Well, were unprovoked. They've gone out to conquer and take over. Well, the answer to that is none.
Yeah.
And, that we can explain what's happened in Georgia and Ukraine. But apart from that, Russia went into Syria at the invitation of Bashar al-Assad.
Yes, and with the approval of the United Nations.
Yeah, in order to stop radical Sunni terrorists. And yet, again, we come back to this notion: is anybody in control? Is anybody making sense of what we're doing? And here's the West backing Sunni terrorists, which we blame for 9/11.
Yeah.
And at the same time declare the number one terrorist threat in the world is Iran, who objectively, I can take you through all the numbers, is not true. They've not been a major sponsor of terrorism at all. Because they said, well, they sponsor Hamas. Great, I'll take you through the Hamas numbers. Over a 24-year period, according to the Israeli Foreign Ministry, they could only implicate Hamas in 105 attacks. Over 24 years. Sorry, that doesn't even, that's minor league stuff. And these were not mass casualty attacks. These were, what I categorize as revenge attacks. So this narrative that gets constructed is completely divorced from reality.
But you see, what kind of gives me second thoughts is that you see, there's extensive conversations going on between the Russian leadership and the U.S. leadership. They're going to be talking about something there. They're not swapping recipes, right? So they're going to be talking about very highly relevant things. And so, with respect to the tariffs, the Russians have been praising the Trump administration for doing this, even though it's pretty much upending the global order as it is. It's reversing globalism. It's a very, very significant policy measure. Then, when it comes to China, a few weeks ago, Donald Trump gave a press conference in which he said, I have a great relationship with Xi Jinping. And he said, do you notice I don't call it the China virus anymore? And that's true. He doesn't call it the China virus anymore. And then, almost under his breath, and then he said, this was in response to a question from a journalist, and he said, yes, I spoke with Xi Jinping. And then almost under his breath, he said, I talked to him a lot. So meaning, the conversation is ongoing. One would almost think they're coordinating. So even though, on the surface, the appearances are, and they give impression of antagonism. But if they talk on a regular basis, and they do talk on a regular basis, apparently, then maybe those are head fakes. I don't know. Trump himself in 2019 was stating, no, not in 2019. This was during the Biden administration, Prosperity Guardian time. He was saying how stupid it is to bomb Yemen. Well, now he thinks that bombing Yemen is really smart. That he, what changed his mind? And I have to suspect that he didn't change his mind. The objective changed. And it seems to me that, because, let's face it, it's these European oligarchical families that have been part of the ruling establishment in Europe for the last 2 centuries, and who have been behind the rise of fascism and Nazism, and who have been perhaps the main beneficiaries of the post-World War II global order. It seems to, and then, you see that Trump administration is really supportive of these populist sovereigntist movements in Europe, like AfD, like Viktor Orban, Robert Fico, Kalin Georgescu, Marine Le Pen. They're overtly supportive of all these parties and all of these movements, while they are being very antagonistic towards the EU. But Trump won't even take Ursula von der Leyen's call. Marco Rubio canceled Kaja Kallas's, the foreign minister of Europe, the meeting with her when she was already in Washington to see him. So, not only a missed meeting, but a public humiliation. So, I have to think there's got to be a method to the madness. If nothing else, by speaking with the Chinese and the Russians, there's got to be a strategy. There's got to be some thinking behind it.
Well, let me, without revealing too many of the details, let's just say I have an acquaintance, good friend, who's been in multiple meetings with Trump and some of his key advisors over the last, let's say the last 2 years. Trump, he is not operating from I've got a plan, I've got a vision. He's almost, in fact, I asked specifically, I said, is Trump a good critical thinker? No, absolutely not. He's very.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very, not a critical thinker. That tends to also go with what he's heard left. And my acquaintance also said, and he's surrounded by bobbleheads. You got this little doll whose head is always doing that. He is not surrounded by people that are coming to say, like he said, hey, I think we need to start bombing Yemen to send a message to Iran that they're not going to get a nuclear weapon. And, at that point, a senior advisor, Hegseth would never do this. Hegseth's a bobblehead. Because the Secretary of Defense should say, well, Mr. President, look, you need to be aware that we've got limited inventories of these missile systems. We've got vulnerabilities of our ships to the missiles that the Houthis have. And what's very likely to happen is we'll get ourselves in a military engagement that will not be ending definitively in our favor. And then it's going to embolden other countries around the world to look at us as weak. Because if we can't defeat the Houthis, but he's not getting that. He's not getting that kind of pushback. And he constructs some fantasies. So take Iran with the nuclear weapon. We know that the U.S. intelligence community says, no, they're not building a nuke.
Yeah.
We know that the Iranians themselves say, we're not building a nuke. It's against our religion. It's only Israel saying, they're not building a nuke. But within that, you've got now this new agreement the comprehensive strategic agreement between Russia and Iran that was signed on January 17th. And the Duma, I think, ratified it yesterday or the day before yesterday. And within that, it expressly talks about they're going to cooperate on non-proliferation. Well, Russia's not going to sign an agreement with Iran if Iran's developing a nuke. And,
Right.
So you've got all that as background, and yet Trump he's created now a straw man, because they're going to go into these negotiations on Saturday with Witkoff. And the Witkoff's going to say, hey, you got to give up nukes. And the Iran is going to go, we don't got nothing to give up. We don't have any. So take the victory. And basically, there would be, the reinstitution of JCPOA. Except, I think Trump he's so under the thumb of the Zionists that they're going to insist that Iran has to completely break contact with Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, can have no independent foreign policy. And I think Iran's going to say, no, sorry, that's not going to happen. Which is why I think Iran was meeting with Russia and China just yesterday in Moscow to coordinate in advance for this meeting, because when Iran sits at that table, it's not alone.
Yeah.
Me and my two big brothers, Vladimir and Xi. What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, that makes sense. And I think that Iran is prepared to show strength. They're not going to let themselves be pushed over. So it's very strange that the Trump administration is painting itself into a corner where they're going to the only move left for them to play is going to be to make good on their threats. But if they try to make good on their threats, they're going to create an absolute, complete, and total disaster, because not only are they going to be defeated and take very, very significant blows from the Iranians. What, they have about 20 military bases with between 50 and 60,000 troops in the Middle East. And they have all these naval assets that can be sunk by the Iranians. And the Iranians have had 20 to 30 years to prepare for this, and it's not, with the precision-guided hypersonic missiles, they can do a whole lot of damage to them. And then what happens? If your bases have been destroyed, if your carrier strike groups have taken debilitated blows, or even if they sank an aircraft carrier, then what do? You have nothing left other than launching a nuke attack.
Yeah.
And if you do launch a nuke attack, well, you're going to completely destroy the global economy, and you're going to make yourself a global pariah. This is going to be rejected by the whole world. So you can't even do this. Are they aware of this? Are they have it? Yeah, I don't know. I go back to the question of, are they idiots, or are they just bluffing, or?
Well, let's look specifically at this now, let's call it the tariff war between the United States and China. What do you see as the economic impact of this? Because, now the United States is up the tariffs to like 100% plus, and China's retaliated. What do you see as the effect economically?
Probably much more harmful to the United States in the short term than to China. China doesn't, I think that maybe between 10 and 15% of Chinese exports at this time depend on the United States market.
Actually, I looked that up yesterday, 3%.
3?
Uh-huh.
Where did you find that?
I did, it was like Chat GPT. I asked the question. So
wow.
That's what it came back. Now, there may be China's total trade through, let's call it the back doors.
Yes,
so for example,
exactly.
They send some stuff to Vietnam that Vietnam exports as, hey, made in Vietnam, and it's really Chinese.
Right.
I know I had firsthand experience with China doing that with aluminum, or the Chinese aluminum manufacturer. I forget the guy's name, but he was sanctioned by the United States for dumping aluminum. And what they did was they shipped it to Mexico. This Chinese guy made a deal with the drug cartel, the Knights Templar. In my company, Berg Associates, we did the investigation. I forget who hired us on this, but it was one of the U.S. aluminum manufacturers who said, "Hey, we're getting killed by the stuff out of Mexico. Can you check it out?" We ultimately we got lucky because this Knights Templar group, where they had this plant, all these ingots, I guess that's what they're called, would come in from China. Then they got restamped as made in Mexico, but they were trying to hire somebody to work inside the plant to perform a particular task. So we sent our guy in as the job applicant. He got the job, so we had access to the inside. But the point was, the Chinese were moving all this aluminum there. So it gets back to the broader. Maybe they're doing 6% or 8% when you take all that into account.
Okay.
But
so not a debilitating thing.
Yeah, it's not like it's 20% or 30%.
Right.
The United States is closer to 20% of what we get from China, or what I think our exports to China are like 20%, 16%. So
yeah, that's So the harm could be done to the United States economy much more than to the Chinese economy. And then there's another effect that has to do with inflation, because foreign trade is one of the two big shock absorbents for inflation. And so just to give put this into the proper context, once upon a time, economists when they spoke about inflation, what they referred to was monetary inflation. That is, the banking authorities flooding the system with liquidity, with money. Mm-hmm. That was inflation. And then that had the effect of diluting the currency's purchasing power and putting upward pressure on consumer prices. But then that effect on consumer prices became what we talk about inflation today. So when people talk about inflation today, they talk about a steady increase in consumer prices. That's the symptom. That's not the cause, right? The cause is the monetary inflation. And in the modern economy, there are two big pressure release valves to prevent monetary inflation from causing consumer price inflation. One of them is the stock market, because the stock markets absorb a lot of this liquidity. So it doesn't circulate in the consumer market, and it doesn't push up consumer prices. The other one is foreign trade, because when you trade with foreign countries, you buy goods from them, and then that money that the foreign countries earn, they sit in those countries' current accounts with the Fed, and that money ends up recycled usually in U.S. treasuries. Mm-hmm. It doesn't circulate in the consumer economy, so it doesn't exert pressure on consumer prices. And not only that, but you also have the effect of using the inflated dollar mass to acquire cheap goods from abroad. So you are actually exporting inflation by importing deflation. And if you look at the nature of consumer price inflation in the United States, if you kind of categorize it by where it's coming from, you see that it's coming from all the domestic sources. The sectors of the economy that cannot be substituted with imported goods, like things like education and healthcare and construction and housing and these kind of things. These have been major contributing factors to consumer price inflation, whereas imports from abroad, from places principally like China, have been disinflationary. So now, when you start to close this trade gap, this trade deficit, you're actually shutting off that pressure release valve, and you're going to get a very strong jolt in consumer price inflation with perhaps, let's say, 6 to 9 months delay. Mm-hmm. But it's going to come, and it's going to be very strong. So the consumer price inflation in the United States as a result of these tariff wars is going to mathematically happen towards the end of this year, after fall and towards December. So that's going to all be very, very painful for the U.S. consumer and for the U.S. economy. Whereas, the effect of attracting back manufacturing to the United States, yes, that's probably going to happen as well, which is a good thing, but that's going to take much longer.
Yeah, let me ask if this is a good parallel. So we had tremendous inflation here in the States. I don't know about in Europe with respect to the price of eggs. Well, why did that happen? Well, there was a concern about bird flu. So the Biden administration had a bunch of chickens killed. So they cut off the supply.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, boom, the eggs became scarce. And you get, sort of classical economic theory. Scarcity, rising prices. And you got tremendous inflation to the point, 4 or 5 times the price of what it was, say, a year ago. It appears that what Trump has done with the tariffs is the equivalent of like killing all the chickens. And therefore, we're going to get the scarcity of eggs and the prices are going up. Am I off base with using that as a metaphor or not?
No, I think you're not. You're not off base. That's exactly it. But at least when it comes to egg, we're very, very fortunate because the people in charge have thought things through, and they have developed insect protein production in the meantime. So we're going to be fine. We're going to be just fine.
Yeah, you're an evil man, Alex Krainer. Yeah, I think it's gonna keep you on your toes for the next year because I think people are expecting some quick results from these tariffs. Instead of getting quick results, I think as you said, it's going to take a little bit to play out. But let me ask you in this way: do the Chinese have an incentive now to buy more U.S. treasuries or to buy less?
To buy less and to dump what they have, which is what they have been doing.
And then they're buying gold, right?
And then they're buying gold, yes. And not only that, it's also giving increased incentives, not just to the Chinese, but to just about everybody, to start to put more urgency behind development of alternative payment methods, to simply ditch the dollar as a currency, a foreign trade currency.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I think if you followed any of the U.S. news, the Trump administration has said, "Yeah, man, 70 countries have come begging us immediately. Oh, cut a deal, help us, don't do this to us. Yeah, we're winning." And I'm thinking, I understand why a lot of those countries are coming around begging and saying, "Hey, let's make a deal. Don't do this to us." But I know in the back of their mind, they're thinking, this is a toxic relationship with this country. I can't continue. I'm going to break up. I'm going to go find another boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I have to say that even if I'm as charitable as I can be with the U.S. administration, exploring whether they could be a method to the madness, and whether they are actually players who thought things through or not, I cannot put a positive spin on a vulgar and kind of cowboy style in foreign policy.
Yeah.
Nobody out there talks like this. Nobody out there is constantly using ultimatums and threats and coercion in speaking to their counterparts out there. I don't know why the Trump administration thinks that they should speak in this. Europeans have had it coming. I understand that, when they do it to Kaja Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen and all these people, I have to say that I feel a certain tinge of Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude.
But if you're speaking with the Russians, with the Iranians, with the Chinese, you have to notice that they have a certain diplomatic culture, that they treat their counterparts with a certain respect, that they try to use polite language in addressing them. Trump the other day, yesterday, he was talking about, oh, they're trying to kiss my ass. I mean, hello?
Yeah.
Who says that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, I have to say the snuff video he posted on Truth Social about
the Yemeni
killing all those Yemeni tribesmen, that was a very low-class act. It was a really low-class act. I mean, somebody should sit them down and say, why don't you learn from Xi Jinping, from the Indian diplomats, from the Russian diplomats? Learn some class. Deal with people in a way that they end up respecting you. Even if they don't like you, you should make yourself respectable. And they're acting like cowboys. I don't know.
I mean, I'm just going to say, I think they're trying to be, not earn respect. They want to be feared, but it's not. It's not the kind of fear you would have had that if you encountered Mike Tyson in his prime, you'd want to make sure that you didn't say or do anything that would provoke him to hit you. But
right,
it's more the fear of I've just entered an asylum and I'm with all these crazy people and I don't know what they're going to do.
Yes, exactly.
Different. It's a different kind of fear, because I think Vladimir Putin actually wasn't lying when he said that basically he would have preferred to have Joe Biden or Kamala Harris as president because it'd simply be more predictable.
Yeah.
With Trump, it's like you've got this abusive parent. You don't know if he's been drinking or not. You don't know if what kind of mood he's in, and sometimes he's nice to you, and sometimes he hits you.
Right.
And that's not a good way to have one of the nuclear powers of the world governed right now.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's very unfortunate. I mean, I have to give credit to Trump for actually picking up the phone and calling up Vladimir Putin, because the bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia is probably one of the most important elements that determines whether the world slide into World War III and a nuclear Armageddon, or whether we actually find our way back to peace. So for this, I think he deserves credit. But for a lot of these other moves and policies and the sheer abrasive style of it, I think that they need to rethink. They need to change course.
Yeah. Well, let's stop on that point. We haven't solved the world's problems, but
well, we've made some. We've progress forward for sure.
Well, no, I know when people go on the internet and they like on YouTube and they say, "Oh, Alex Krainer, I gotta listen to what he has to say," because you've got a great perspective and a pleasant way of putting forth your ideas and your thoughts. And where should people look? Where should people look for you?
Well, they should find me on X. My handle is @NakedHedgie. For people who trade and invest, I have a daily markets newsletter called iSystem Trend Compass on Substack. And then I also have a personal Substack called Alex Krainer Substack. So that's the three platforms where I'm most active.
All right, my friend. Hey, Alex, I always learn stuff by talking with you and just enjoy the chance to have the chat. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Likewise, Larry. Take care, and great pleasure to join you today. Until the next time.
Okay. And that's Alex Krainer, folks. Great man, wonderful insights, and do encourage you to follow him. I want to thank you for watching. If you found this useful, productive, insightful, just hit the like and subscribe button and tell your friends. I'm Larry Johnson, and this has been Countercurrents. Thanks for watching.